Good afternoon, everyone. Our next session is regards to cultural changes. And before I start, I'll allow the panel who's joining me today to introduce themselves. So starting with ladies first. Over to you, Aimee.
Hi, I am Aimee Barratt. I am a HR business partner at Multiplex. As my job title suggests, I partner closely with our project directors, our senior leadership team to drive the people strategy at Multiplex and also look after our workforce planning in the business as well.
Thanks. My name is Alonge. I'm CEO of the Equal Group. We're a data-driven diversity and inclusion consultancy. My background's in infrastructure, so I spent 10 years in the energy sector. Currently, we work with organisations to help them on their cultural change and diversity and inclusion journeys.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm David Hancock. I'm the construction director in the Infrastructure and Projects Authority, which is part of Cabinet Office. I report to Cabinet Office and Treasury. So I work for government. I've been in the industry for quite some time, worked for a few prime ministers and ministers that you'll have noticed over the years.
I'm Steve Slessor. I am Managing Director of Galliford Try's Environment Business, and that is a £500 million annual turnover that focuses on the water sector and the environment.
Thank you all. So, cultural change can be a complex and challenging process, particularly within an industry that has long history and established ways of working. The UK construction sector is no exception, with a culture that has historically been characterised by risk aversion, fragmentation and resistance to change. Our experts are here to answer some questions on how to begin to change our current culture and the benefits of doing this. So I'm going to come to the team and ask a few questions. So what are the main barriers to cultural change within the UK industry, and how can they be overcome? Are there any particular challenges that are unique to the industry or that require specific approaches? David, can I come to you on this one first?
Yeah, so, the first challenge is our brand or reputation. You know, people talk about construction and they immediately think, well, if you failed all your O-levels, then that'll be the job for you. You know, they also kind of consider it that you'll be sitting in a trench somewhere, pouring concrete in the rain. And it's really different. All you have to do now is walk around this show, for instance, to see all the things that are going on. I've got companies now that are employing drone drivers because once upon a time, for those of you old enough to remember, you used to go and set out site with a theodolite with your hat on backwards. And it would take us, a couple of weeks to set out a site. Now, using drones and satellites, I can set out a site in a couple of hours. I can look at the data, and that's a new thing that's coming in. I can look at that data, and when somebody says I've completed 30% of the job, I can have a drone fly around it, come back and say, no, in actual fact, it's 29.4%. So the industry's changed massively. We haven't changed the way we tell the industry to the outside world. It's still the kind of builder outside your house, or if somebody's digging a hole at the wrong time. And I think we have to go right back to primary education, let alone secondary education, to actually say our industry's changed, that in actual fact, it's quite a dynamic and exciting industry. And I think there was a panel on here before that said, how do we get more diverse people into the industry? And the idea would be, if we made it more exciting, if they had the choice of Google or coming to construction, you could see them going, really? Google? Construction? If we made it more exciting, if we told them what we did, if we had role models, if we had all of those things and we got together, then I think we could make a difference. But I remember, I used to work for the Mayor of London when it was Ken Livingstone, and we did a report then, back in the day, which said how many women are in construction, and guess what? It's about 2% on the coalface, about 12% if we got everybody that could, that did anything in construction. If I look at it now, what have we got up to? Maybe 3% and about between 12 and 14%. So, you know, we're not moving fast enough. And I think we've got to tackle it right at the root cause, which is talking to schools and getting schools to understand that this is a great industry.
Absolutely. And Aimee?
I think you touched on it on the question around the sort of split workforce that we've got on construction at the moment, with those that have been in the industry for a long time and experience construction in a different way, and those that are coming into construction and expect more and expect better than the stereotype. So I think it's about sort of educating those that have been in the industry for a longer time, not in a patronising way, but in a way to say, look, those coming through do expect a different industry to what you've gone through. Just because you've gone through that doesn't mean that you need to put someone that's working under you through that as well. Something that's worked really well for us is reverse mentoring. So just that sort of a bit more understanding around what each individual has gone through. So putting sort of practical steps in place like that to help the cultural change, because I think, the hard thing is that split workforce and what everyone's sort of understanding of the construction industry is.
Fantastic. And Matt, what would you say some of the challenges are as well?
Yeah, I think David mentioned it in terms of the reputation that the sector has. I think one of the other things that we need to really get to grips with is the culture that exists on site. And I think a lot of kind of problematic behaviour, problematic language is termed as banter. And I think this love of banter, this weddedness to banter is quite problematic. And really we need to use every single kind of increment of innovation to be an opportunity to change. I think sometimes we hide behind this fact that construction's been around for a long time and it's a very historic sector, but actually it's not. Construction, as David alluded to, is different now to how it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. So every single increment is an opportunity to do things better, address culture, address behaviours. So I think there has to be a kind of proactive approach to really considering how the sector operates.
No, thank you for that. And Stephen, coming to you.
To be honest, the guys there really caught most of it in a nutshell. I think the only thing I would add to that is we need to layer in some education. We need to educate our existing workforce in terms of making sure we have a really wide, welcoming, inclusive and culture within our organisations. And that starts at the top, starts in leadership. And everybody who's sat in this room today or stood watching will be a leader of something in their own right. And so my appeal to you now would be to please, if you get a chance, embrace a really diverse workforce and help us make that change.
Can I just add to that question? Again, back to you, Stephen, there. What are the main barriers to cultural change in the UK construction organisation? So you work for a large organisation, Galliford Try. So what are the challenges?
Construction, traditionally by its nature, has been quite a transient occupation. It's been difficult at times to get continuity of work. Making investment, so as a Tier 1 contractor, I would want to invest in the people that work for us. That's difficult because the profit margins are very thin. And so there's sort of some inbuilt challenges. I think the other thing is it's just a real inertia. I think we're going through a transition where, and David touched on this earlier really, where we're moving away from just digging holes and pouring concrete, and we'll always do that, but we're actually transitioning to doing other things around digital, around virtual reality. We're working in the metaverse. There's all manner of different things that are going on at the moment, and we're on the cusp of a real change, and you can feel it, you can sense it. The fact that we're actually having this conversation today is testament to that.
Yeah.
And so, for me, I think the biggest barrier to change is actually about the people that are in there already thinking, I can't do this, it's beyond me, or it's not my place. And I think, it's like I said, change starts at the top, but in order for that to percolate right the way through, you need to support people by education and by training them, giving them the skills that they need to help them break through those barriers. But we also need to do more. I think any business who sits here today and says, we're great, we're doing everything we can, is talking rubbish.
Yeah.
you can always do more, and I include my own organisation in that. And so for me, you've just got to get right in amongst it, Carol, and get into it. That's the way.
Absolutely. And are there any best practices or techniques that have been shown to be really effective, David, in your experience?
So, well, I'm 200,000 short of people at the moment. So I don't have enough people in this industry to do what my ministers want me to do, let alone what the private sector wants to do. And I think we miss out on a massive portion of society if we, that we have the potential to tap into and get people in. Good practices. I work for the civil service. The civil service is about 50-50 men to women. I'm just used to that kind of ratio. But I came out of the construction industry where, I can almost, the top women, I know most of them. Like I know Michaela, Beth West on East Coast Main Line. I've worked with some fantastic women. We just need to promote them more. And there needs to be, the best practice is having, so I can't be a coach to a woman because I don't understand what they're going through. I mean, I can't, but what I can be is a sponsor. And by being a sponsor, it's actually giving somebody the ability to say, well, what would you do? Because there is a difference. Michaela and I were talking about this where, I remember I did a job where I'm a risk manager now, but I wasn't always. And I got on a plane. Somebody said they need a risk manager in Copenhagen. I said, I could do that. And they said, what do you know about risk management? I said, I'll get a book. I'll go there. And I read the book on the plane going out there. And I've still got the report. The report said when I worked for this company, this is the worst risk manager we have ever employed in there. By the end of it, I got prizes. And it's just having that ability to go, I can do that. And a lot of women I've met would go, well, I'd never do that because look, here's 7 things I can't do. And I just think that a male sponsor being able to say to and open it up and being there just for people to talk to and say, what would you do? Yeah. How would you apply for this job? How would you write this CV? Is what every male in this audience has a responsibility to try and get at least 2 females into the industry. And if we had 100,000 people here, I would have 200,000 people more, and we'd be able to do it. So I think men have a responsibility to sponsor women into the industry.
Well said, David. Well said. And yourself, Matt?
Yeah, I think going back to Stephen's point on education, I think that's a really, really important point. I think the industry generally isn't great at storytelling. As David alluded to, kind of some of the new technology coming in is quite exciting and it's an opportunity to shout about what we do. However, there are kind of barriers in terms of the jargon that people use. So when we advertise roles, they're not necessarily clear to the average person that doesn't work in construction what it is, what it means. And I think that's an opportunity to really address the way that we practice and promote what the sector can do for people in terms of the opportunities that are available. In terms of best practice, we've worked with the Mayor of London on a scheme to get young black men into construction. And really, as part of that program, we took employers on a journey to say, actually, if you're the average young black man, and obviously there's different shapes and sizes of that, how would you come into contact with anybody that works in this sector? How do you change that dynamic that people automatically go to in terms of muddy boots and being down holes to the opportunities to fly drones and the opportunities to be in an office and work on kind of construction plans and digital twin and all of these fantastic things that are coming down the line in terms of the next 5-10 years. So there is an opportunity to do better at telling the story, engaging people, and hopefully changing the reputation of the sector through the average person's eyes.
Can I ask you another question, Mac? And I feel that I can ask you this question. You're a young black man, and there's a lot of black men that probably don't see construction as the ideal career to go into. Cold, muddy boots, not really for me. I'll only be at maybe a labouring role, something I can't climb. What would you say, and how would you approach that conversation?
I think some of that question needs to be tackled with honesty. So it can be cold, depending on what you're doing. It can be cold, it can be muddy, and you may not necessarily fit in. And I think this is the opportunity for organisations to get better at telling stories. But to David's point, there is an importance for senior leaders to get involved in those conversations to actually, encourage people to get into the sector, and B, when they get into the sector, kind of put an arm around them and show them that actually this is a place where you can not just have a job, but actually have a career. What does the next 10, 15, 20 years look like for you as an individual? What are you interested in? What aren't you interested in?
Yeah.
And I think there is an opportunity, again, to the point that Stephen mentioned, that education piece has to happen internally for organisations as well. One of the things that we work with organisations on is understanding some of the barriers that are currently existing in your workforce on site. I mentioned before banter. There was, some sites where racism is the norm, or sexism is the norm, or ableism is the norm. So really addressing those root causes to make sure that actually we are being more inclusive in our approach.
No, thank you for that. And Aimee, from a HR perspective.
I think from an organisational point of view, from our responsibility is to ensure that there's an infrastructure and a process in place. We need allies, of course, we need male allies, but it's around, questioning ourselves, what does our promotion process look like? How are we giving those underrepresented groups a voice within the organisation? And if we are putting that structure in place from an organisation, then at least, we're giving someone the opportunity to talk, or people are, aware of what our promotion process looks like. It's very transparent, it's equal. So, from an organisation, we need to ensure that those things are in place.
And what role can leadership play in this kind of role? You're an organisation, you've got leaders there that have been there for a long time. What changes would a leader need to do to be effectively making this cultural change? I'll go to you, David.
Yeah, I see all big companies saying all the right things. All the leaders do the thing. Somewhere in middle management is where it kind of suddenly, there's some kind of treacle there or something where they go, well, that's what they say up there, but what they really mean is.
Yeah.
So I think there is a need. They always say the right things. If you read their strategies in any of the companies, big companies you look at, it all says the right things. We're open, you can come. But I think there is a need in middle management to actually educate those. And it's also, construction's always been about a 5-day working week. You come in at 9, go home at 5. If you've got concrete pour on, then you stay till 7. And it's always been that way. And now we've got companies where we've got people like Beth West, who's running West Coast Main Line, who says, hold on a minute, I've got other things to do. We don't need to do this. And then when they do that, people go, oh, no, we didn't. I hated that. Beth and I used to talk. I live in Oxford, and this is our breakfast meetings. I had to leave Oxford at 5:30 in the morning to come to a breakfast meeting in London. I hated it. Beth hated it. And we got drinking a beer, and she said, I really hate doing this. I said, so do I.
Yeah.
I said, why do we do it? She said, well, you told me to come in. And then we talked to other people, and they said, well, we hate it as well. And so we said, right, so we're not going to do breakfast meetings or Fridays. People have got to pick kids up from school or whatever. And nobody has championed that. And then when somebody does it, and I'm afraid to say it's normally when a woman gets into that position where she challenges it, or when a black person gets in there and says, you can't say that, or you can't do this, or do you realise we have, we have different things that we worry about? And we start talking. So I think dialogue with middle managers and actually speaking to people and actually saying, well, how does it feel for you? How does this company, how would it be, how can we make it feel better? Because inclusion means that you feel as though you're fit. And you're never going to know that unless you talk to people to find out what is it that makes them feel as though they fit.
Absolutely. And Stephen?
At the risk of repeating myself, I couldn't agree more with David. I think he's absolutely spot on about middle management and that treacle layer. It's a source of much perplexion for me because it manifests itself in lots of different ways. And I get frustrated because I can be really clear and articulate exactly the vision that David suggests that are in our policies and papers and things like that. However, like a lot of things, just because you want something to happen doesn't mean to say it will happen. And people are not robots and they have independent thought. And And we talked earlier about education being part of it, but actually giving people the opportunity to understand those challenges has probably been the easiest way of addressing those barriers. And some people are more open to it than others. And I think we're in a space now between the next 5 and 10 years, a lot of those traditional cultural issues that we've had will start to dissipate simply because those people are retiring, leaving the industry. And actually, I think we've got a 4 or 5 year period to really coach, educate and train the next generation of those middle managers to make it better. That's not a here and now answer. I don't think there is a here and now answer, to be honest.
Yeah.
I think we just need to we're going to keep working on it. And we need to stop mansplaining things. We need to put ourselves in other people's shoes, but actually listen. I'm a father of 3 daughters, so I'm well educated in listening. And so that really helps in terms of understanding the challenges. I think the other thing is that where you have got some talent that comes from people that are either a different gender or a different colour or maybe neurodiverse, then actually, how do you help harness the power of that? I've worked with some incredibly talented neurodiverse people that don't realise they are. And for a lot of people, the logic is what gets them through the day. And they say this management stuff about people, it's just... But actually, they've got some really core skills that in the right way, the right scenarios can be really, really powerful. So I think it's incumbent on us to try and help those people come to the top. But in order to answer your question, there's no short-term fix. It's a medium to long-term solution for me.
And then to add to that, how do you then track, those key successes? What's the mechanism for an organisation to say, well, I was here, but I'm now here? How do you track it? Because I hear that, for doing your pre-qualification submission and tenders, you've got to evidence that you are making cultural changes.
So there's an age-old adage in construction that applies here: what gets measured gets done. And from my experience, the more you measure something, the more you put a metric in place, the more traction, because people are being held to account. So some of the things that I would do, for example, would be, yes, we have to do gender pay gap reporting by law, but that's the minimum. What else do we have to do on top of that to promote, a wider diversity? So, for example, how many of our job applications have flexible working? How many of our job applications have, encourage part-time working? How many ex-offenders do we have in the business? How many people from a military background do we have in the business? And I am not one person to say set a target. Targets just become tick boxes. This is about continuous improvement, continuous strength and development. And obviously working with people like Aimee in our existing business, our HR team is a big part of that, and developing workforce strategies, employee recruitment strategies and retention is so important.
Excellent. Aimee?
I think it comes down to really listening as well, and what mechanism you've got in place to listen. So, for example, we've got an employee engagement survey that we roll out every year. But it's not just about finding what people have to say in the organisation. What are we doing with that information and how are we making change? So all of our project directors are held to account with a project action plan post the engagement survey to make it sort of as measurable as possible. It's really important listening, but what are you doing with that information and how are you feeding that back?
Absolutely. And Mac?
Yeah, and just to add to that, absolutely we need to measure what we see as important, but we also need to go a step further. I think it's not just about numbers, it's also about people's experiences. So we can't make the assumption that just because people are in jobs that they're happy. You actually need to go to a step further to understand what is it you like about your role, your organisation, what is it that you don't like, what are the opportunities to change. And I think to your point earlier, addressing things that are uncomfortable for people, addressing things that they don't necessarily agree with. And I guess also kind of to your point a little bit earlier, Stephen, in terms of the role of leadership, I think we have to get beyond thinking about things in terms of people leaving the sector and looking for that 5-10 year opportunity when people retire. The opportunities now, and leaders really need to step up, be role models, and take that time to understand what is missing from their workforce. It's not enough to just say that people are struggling or people are leaving or we're not attracting people. What is it that you could do to change that dynamic?
100%. David?
Yeah, I always think quotas are a double-edged sword, aren't they?
Yeah.
Because, we have quotas for women in the boardroom, and yet the women say to me, I don't want to be a quota, I want to be there because I deserve to be there.
Yeah, exactly.
The unfortunate thing is, I think we need quotas until we get to a level where where it's normal.
Yeah.
And therefore, I think we do need to have performance and targets to get there. And then when we get there, then we can drop them, and then people will get there on their own merits. But otherwise, we're moving so slowly. We're moving so slowly, both on the ethnic and the gender. And now we've got neurodiversity. We have gender fluidity, all of those things, which we're really so far behind the times. And most of it, as Steve or Max said, was about education. It is about education, and not saying, well, when I did, we get the when I's, don't we? When I did it, I was there and I was on a thing and everybody else has to go through it. It shouldn't be like that. You should be saying, I hated it, and I'm going to make sure that people don't have to go through that when they come on board. So, unfortunately, I think we're with quotas until we get to a level of that we can, consider to be somewhere near normal, and then we can go back to, people will see it as normality and therefore get there on their own rights.
Another question: do you think it's large organisations, tier 1s, tier 2 contractors? Do you think that there is a need to have a dedicated role for a person to be doing that, to implement, or does it have to have all the boardroom members having that part of their remit to change the culture, or is it just one person to run that change to start? Go on.
Yeah, no, I think we need to get into the habit of seeing it as everybody's responsibility. I think the danger with having individuals that are responsible for diversity and inclusion or the metric side of things is that people defer to them, and that can be really challenging when you're wanting leaders to step up, you're wanting leaders to look within their own remit to say, what could I do? How can I influence the way that I talk to people or sponsor people or coach people? But I do think that sometimes you do need that level of expertise and that level of dedication to work alongside the organisation, just to make sure you've got that best practice within your organisation, within your company, that people can call on, that people can be supported by. But ultimately, it needs to be everyone's responsibility. And that goes to the way that we communicate this. This isn't something that we're doing to tick boxes. This isn't something that we're doing just to comply. It's about all of us enjoying the work that we do on a day-to-day basis and hopefully developing products and services that are a much better fit for a diverse community.
Absolutely. Stephen?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with Mac. Leadership starts with it's an individual thing. It's something that's personal to everybody. And there's no one person, I think, can be accountable for this. If we're going to get genuine cultural change embedded, then everyone has to take ownership of that. And it's great me sitting here and saying that, but I could say there's maybe one or two people that sit around my board that perhaps aren't as proactive as that. And, then you need to say, well, ask yourself that question, why? Yeah. So actually my role becomes more about making sure everybody's on the same page and bought into the reasons for why. Because it's only then that you can really, really embed it. And you can get past that layer of treacle we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
There's no magic bullet. It really isn't. I wish I could sit here now and say, if we did this, and this by then, problem solved. The fact is we're alienating 50% of our potential workforce, as David's already highlighted, and we're doing bugger all about it. So we need to change.
Can I just jump in there? I think that we need to start reframing it in terms of incentives and consequences. And I think when people are incentivized to do the right thing, there are consequences to not. So if you've got people on your board that aren't as proactive and aren't looking at it and are kind of making excuses not to do it, that then becomes a performance issue, and saying that actually, as an organisation, this is the direction that we're moving in, and if you're not moving in that direction, these are the consequences. And overnight, you'll see that actually the culture changes, and people, even if they don't inherently believe it, start to look at it because it's incentivized, and they understand that actually there's no progression for me personally if I don't look at this.
So you're absolutely right, Mac, and just for the avoidance of doubt, none of my board are in that place. I was using that as an example in case I get lynched later on.
But it goes back to one of the other panels that we had, that we're trying to increase people coming into the sector. And what we're saying, if companies don't demonstrate, it's hard. The employee is now doing the interview. They're asking for specific things before they take the role. So, as an organisation, it will soon come apparent during an interview process if you're not doing what you're perceived to be doing as an organisation. Aimee, do you want to add to that question?
The only thing I'd add is totally agree that it's got to come from everyone. It's got to come from the leadership team. But I think there is something very special and valuable about having champions as well in your organisation. I'm looking at Sue here, who's just turned up from Multiplex, and she's an absolute champion in our organisation for these sort of things. And she leads by example. So we need people like Sue, but it shouldn't just be up to people like Sue. It's got to come from everyone.
Okay. So what are the most effective communication strategies for promoting cultural changes within the UK construction industry? So, what would be best used in a way of communicating changes? I'll come to you, Matt, first.
Yeah, I think people often look at communication as something special or extracurricular you need to do, but there are ways that you as an organisation communicate your brand now inherently. So whether that's social media, whether that's through your website, whether that's through word of mouth, there are existing channels, and it's really just about changing the tone of that communication to essentially reflect what you want as an outcome. So if we are looking at culture, ensuring that we're all on the same page in terms of what a positive, inclusive culture looks like. I'd also say that communication needs to be seen as a two-way exercise.
Yeah.
I think often organisations can get into the habit of just preaching and never really taking the opportunity to say, is that message landing? Are people interpreting it the way that we want them to interpret it?
Yeah.
Are there misunderstandings in what we've communicated or how we've communicated? So you really need to open up those channels to make sure that you're conscious and listening as much as you are speaking.
Absolutely. David?
Yeah, I think role models are good. I can't remember what it said, but if people look and they say, if they don't see that could be me in 10 years' time, or that could be, I would like to be in that role. So I think the idea of having role models and getting them out there, and things like, the Women in Construction awards and that, where they can look and say, look, this person is a CEO, that's what I'd like to be. But then they need some accessibility, because the question then is, well, how did you get there? Because one of the things you do is you look at the who's at the top and you say, if I want to get there, what did they do to get there? And so I do think without role models in our industry, then it's very hard for people to say, that's where I should be. So the more role models we have, the more we shout success. It puts more stress on the small layer of people that are there, but that's what we should be doing.
Okay. Steve?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think communication, you're absolutely right. But you've got, I think was it maybe Mac or Aimee both said about listening. I think the worst thing that I could do is sit in an ivory tower somewhere and just say, "Oh, this is all great. This is what we're doing. He's a metric, and we're achieving this." But quite often, you've got to get in there and you've got to listen to people. So creating forums, creating opportunities to get that two-way feedback. And yes, you can do engagement surveys, but there's nothing beats just going out there and asking people how they're feeling. We got really good at that during COVID. We got really good at, sharing our emotions and feeling a little bit different. And I'm mindful that we've got Mates in Mind across there in the Lighthouse Club, which are two great charities which help with mental health. And it'd be wrong of me to sit here and not promote them while I'm here. But for me, you've got to be in there and you've got to articulate, communicate and talk. And I think and that poses its own challenges, because as we get more people through early careers, they communicate in different ways. So like my daughter spent forever on things like Snapchat. Yeah. And I was, bloody hell, what do I do with that, And the only thing I found funny was the filters. So for me, we also need to listen to those people about how to communicate, what resonates, how to break those barriers down, because none of us have the answers.
Absolutely, and I think we've noticed, during COVID that technology played a real important role. You didn't have to go on the motorway to have those meetings. You could actually just fire up a Teams or a Zoom or any of those video platforms to get the messaging out. So again, there is actually no excuse to get those messages out. So just the final question to each and every one of you here. can you leave us with one piece of advice on cultural change, either a tip on how to implement or a reason for implementing? Come to Aimee first.
Thank you. I've said it before, but listen. Feedback. Have a mechanism in place to listen. It can't just be transactional from one thing, like the employee engagement survey. It has to come from things like focus groups, from committees, whether it's a women's committee or a wellbeing committee. But have practical things in place from your organisation. So it drives those conversations.
Absolutely. Right.
I'm going to be greedy and give 2 tips. So the first is to, drive the message that this is everybody's responsibility. I think the more we can collaborate, the more we can kind of collectively take responsibility for our culture, the better. I think sometimes people assume that culture is something that's done to you. So when you enter an organisation, you're a victim of culture. That's not often the case. We have to understand the agency that we have as employees or people that engage within workforces. The second tip is really to get external help. So we can't always assume that everything we need is internal. There are kind of different perspectives, different insights that you can get from somebody coming in or an organisation coming in with a fresh perspective, fresh set of eyes, and giving you, kind of holding the mirror up to you as an organisation.
Yeah, it all sounds doom and gloom, but actually change is coming whether they like it or not. There's a big change coming. We're having the building safety regime with data coming in, the golden thread. We're moving towards, if you look at build off-site, if you look at the Offsite Alliance, we're moving to manufacturing. And if you look at manufacturing, you then see the ratio of men to women in manufacturing. And you go to the Cowley Works where they're doing automotive, the minis, 50-50. If you look at pictures of the war in the factories when the men had to go off, full of women. And so one of the things about factory working is the flexibility. You can swap shifts. You can say to somebody, actually, I want to go and see, my daughter play rugby or whatever. I want the day off. And if what you swap with me, could you do it and I'll do it another time there. So MMC, which is modern methods of construction, is coming, and it's coming in a tsunami because we don't have enough people, because we do need standardization of products. We do need... This industry has been flatlining on productivity for too many years. And I think that and digitization is going to hit this industry, and we're going to have to see more diversity big time in order to be able to meet that kind of demand.
Thanks, David.
Yeah, David hit the nail on the head. Change is coming. And like all things, you either need to get on the bus and get with it, or you may as well get off at the next stop because it's happening one way or the other.
Well said.
So my sage piece of wisdom in my mind would be, when you walk away today, think about where you work or what you do or who you're with and how you work with those people and what it feels like for you. What one change could you make to make their life that little bit different, that little bit more inclusive, or that little bit special for them to be around you when you're working with them? And I challenge my people all the time because we work with lots of different people. No one knows what's going on behind somebody's doors at home. Nobody knows how people are feeling. And if you want to make that cultural change we talk about, that means asking difficult questions or questions you maybe wouldn't normally ask. And, ask yourself, one of my pet hates, for example, is how many man hours do you need? It drives me bonkers that we're still using the term man hours. And people do it. I'm not one for saying, you need to change all your language or anything like that, but it's just something basic that's ingrained, and you need to move away from that. There's different terminology, different things we can use. But that's just one simple thing that everybody could do tomorrow that would make such a massive difference to inclusion. So tiny steps for me.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Now we come to the end, but like most discussions, is there any questions from the audience that you want to ask the panel?
Hi there, my name is Alex. I have a question for Stephen and Aimee. What's your plan for the next 5 years to train middle management and get young people into the industry? Do you have something that you're looking at? Do you have something concrete? Because from my experience, the majority of the people working in constructions are 25, 27 and above. And the middle management, especially the subcontractors, They don't get any training on leadership, communication, emotional management, negotiation, conflict, de-escalation, nothing like that. So do you have any plans for that? Thank you.
Great question.
So in terms of getting people into the industry and the sort of continuing support from it with that, it's about looking at our future talent, not just at graduate level, but at that apprentice level as well. We've got an amazing social value team at Multiplex that HR we partner with. And that's all around that education piece at that earlier level. So what does construction look like? How do we attract people in? So that's initially from an attraction piece, and that's something we'll continue with. For example, our graduate program, we have a 50-50 male-female target that we hit last year with the first year of implementing it, so that's really exciting. And then your second part of the question is around the learning and development. So what are we doing? We're rolling out things like management essentials training. We identified a gap that people were sort of moving up the ladder technically, but were getting put into these management positions, well, middle management positions, without actually have ever managed someone. And that was sort of the trickiest thing that they came across, because that obviously trickles down. So we've rolled out a management essentials course that almost 200 people in our organisation have done, and we'll continue to do that as well.
So, like Aimee's business, Galliford Try have placed a lot of work in social value. So, just to explain, so I look after the environment business, which is more around civil engineering, and we have a building business, which mainly subcontracts and in packages of trades work. And they have achieved some remarkable transformational results with social value in terms of construction apprentices, college courses, sponsoring, engagement. I think we work with an organisation called Social Value Portal, and they've done a few independent assessments of our work, and typically for every pound we spend, we generate another 30 pence in social value in terms of local economic benefit, whether that's employment or spend with a local supply chain. And I can't remember the exact statistic, but certainly our business in Scotland has generated something like 650 apprentices in the last year. In terms of what the business I look after, there's two things to answer your first point about. So we're a little bit different to a lot of tier ones because we actually directly employ operatives, electricians, fitters in the work that we do. And so we have an extensive apprenticeship program. We work with a partner called Hercules, who supply our operatives. We have nationally recognised apprentice programs with them. We work with Seeker right across the UK to develop schools. So in Scotland, we've just signed up to doing a post-school 6-month introduction to construction, where you do 6 months, and then we offer you a role, and you can pick amongst the 2 or 3 different ones. In terms of the training piece, your second part of your question, I've got 1,700 people that work in my bit of the business, and roughly about 250 of them are what you would call middle managers. And of that, we've just introduced a new training course called not the most exciting of names, Leading the GT Way. But Leading the GT Way is all about recognising that we're working in different environments with a different cultural background, and our HR team and our social value team, a bit like Aimee's, have worked incredibly hard to put this together. We've also got an internal promotion scheme called internal mobility, where we try and move people across our businesses to make sure they get the opportunities that they might not get in the part that they are. So I'm sure that was a rambling answer, and I'm really sorry for taking up your time, but hopefully it's addressed your question.
Right. Brilliant, thank you. Other question?
Thank you. My name is Meta. I'm a sustainability officer with a manufacturer of valves and fittings in North Yorkshire. We've got about 300 people on site, and 200 of them are kind of on the shop floor doing assembly and manual work. And what I've kind of struggled with is kind of just the indifference, or they don't really want to engage. So I tried to do a sustainability survey, and I got like a 90% response from the office people, but about 30% response from the shop floor, even though I kind of came up to them and I was like, oh, you want to do this survey? You can win £50 voucher. And the response was, well, I've been here 40 years, nothing's ever changed, so I'm not really bothered, just let me eat my lunch. Do you have any advice on how to approach people that, I guess, don't want to be approached?
Matt, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, so really good point. And I think this is very common to people in terms of getting on-site individuals to participate. One of the factors is time. So do they actually have the time? One of the things we work with organizations on is carving out that time specifically to engage in the survey. And then the next point is kind of the incentives and consequences. So what incentives can you offer for individuals in engaging, and are there any consequences to them not engaging? And then finally, there's also consideration of their feedback. So if they're saying that, I've been here 30 years, nothing's ever changed, that's an opportunity for you to tell the story, to say actually things have changed. These are the things we've changed, and this is how much they've changed by if you've got those metrics. But then also to tell the story about the journey that you're on. So what is it that you're hoping to achieve by them participating? The more you can articulate that, the more encouraged they'll be to say, actually, it's important that I engage because I want my voice to be heard and I want to have a part to play in the direction of travel of this organisation.
Do you want to answer that, David?
I've got to go in a minute. I'm on another stage in a minute, so to talk. But again, I mean, Build UK, back to your thing. If you look at Build UK are looking at entrance into construction. Go on their website. They are part of the Construction Leadership Council. So there is a leadership council. And within that will show you kind of ways to get in the industry. Answering your question about how do you get over obstacles to people, net zero. Look, this planet is in a real dire state, right? 43% of carbon comes from our industry, right? Combined with transport, steel, if we don't change, right, so things are changing, and they need to change a lot faster than they are doing. So I think storytelling, I love storytelling, it's kind of the main way forward. And to tell the story about, how it's changed. One of the reasons we sit here and talk to people is to tell those stories. That's as was said both by Mac and by Steve, is that things are changing.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So I'd just like to say thank you to my fellow panellists, Stephen, David, Mac and Aimee, for your time. And thank you all for joining during your lunch break as well. Thank you very much.